Hey guys, welcome back. Oh god, that voice cracked. Welcome back to AnimezRUs. This is episode 2 of our fanfiction read, and I'm quite excited for this one because this is probably my favorite Homestuck fanfiction that doesn't have a specific pairing. Although it is a very long story, it is very good and very detailed. And thank you, Blood, for allowing me to make this video. It's called Haven, and its description is: John's world is torn apart when he tests positive for a disease that threatens humanity, a disease that turns people into violent monsters with gray skin and yellow eyes. He's quickly taken from his town and dumped into a fenced-in city, Haven, where all the diseased go to live out the remainder of their days. Chapter 1. John Egbert began his new life sitting in the back of an ambulance. It wasn't much of an ambulance anymore. The stretchers and medical equipment had been taken out, replaced by benches lining the walls. The inside was plain white, the benches hard and uncomfortable. However, it still had a window on the back doors, and through that he could see his hometown rapidly disappearing, rapidly becoming a speck in the distance. Trying to divert his attention from the fact that he was leaving for the last time, John instead shifted his gaze to his two companions in the modified back of the ambulance. They were sitting across from each other, as close to the door as they could get. Both their gazes were directed on the window. They hadn't spoken a word or even paid the slightest attention to John once the ambulance had started moving. He wasn't sure if they were male or female. Their entire bodies were obscured by bulky white suits, their faces covered by gas masks, which gave them a bug-like appearance. It didn't alarm John, though. He was far too used to seeing protective gear. He even had a mask and suit at home hanging in the closet. His dad had even got it custom fit for him, so he wouldn't have to walk around treading on the toes. But none of that mattered now. He would never need to wear one again. He sighed and banged his head back against the wall, the echo reverberating around the enclosed space. The white-suited guard on the left shifted their weapons slightly. The worst part about the trip, besides the immediate destination, was the boredom. John's natural instinct was to yell or scream or do anything that would interrupt the ceaseless routine of doing nothing, but common sense told him it wasn't the right place to cause mischief. They were on the highway now, in the middle of the desert, and John knew that if he made a fuss, they wouldn't hesitate to chuck him out the back. Death would be slow and painful out there, with the only passerbys more modified medical trucks. Where he was going, there was food and water. Or at least there was supposed to be. A while later, after giving up trying to count the amount of dirt specks on the wall opposite him, John tried the window again. The sun was sinking down, his hometown long gone. Although, along with his school, his friends, his dad, John banged his head back against the wall again. He had to stop thinking about that. They told him to forget everything. He didn't even have a chance to say goodbye. It's easier that way, kid. New start, yeah, the woman had said as she steered him into the back of the truck when asked why he couldn't see his dad again. The last glimpse he saw was a crowd in the middle of middle schoolers, eagerly pressing their faces on the door, trying to see who tested positive. It was a rare occurrence at his school. John had only recalled it one other time. He didn't know the kid, though. Just some scrawny fifth grader with a huge mop of hair. John had scanned the faces quickly, hoping for a last glimpse of his friends, but no use. They wouldn't have found out it was him until it was too late. Besides, they never tried to look in the testing room. Said it was demeaning to the poor kid getting tested. Poor kid getting tested. That was now all he could be remembered as. The poor sap who got a red light. The sun dipped all the way below the horizon, purples and pinks of the deserts morphing into plain black. John didn't know how long they'd been sitting there. His phone and watch had been taken from him, guessing it had been at least 5 hours. Finally, the truck slowed to a stop. John's stomach lurched. The realization hit him, began to sink in. He was going to Haven. He was going to Haven, and he was never coming out. Chapter 2. The back of the ambulance banged open, and 2 guards jumped down and then gestured to John. He stood unsteadily, his legs half asleep from the long journey. He walked forward, and they each grabbed one of his arms, lifting him out of the back. His feet hit dusty gravel, and he looked at the direction they had come. It was flat, gray desert, as far as he could see. The only thing breaking the flat line of landscape were a few shrubs dotted here and there. The moon was covered by a thick layer of clouds. Feeling extremely apprehensive, he slowly swiveled around to face his new home. Haven was a city. In its prime, it was a sought-out destination for anyone who wanted to do something with their lives. It housed over 1 million people, and was home to some of the greatest inventors. That's what it was before the disease, anyway. That's where it's rumored to have started, but nobody except the government really knows the truth. Now, it was nothing more than a ruin. The skyline of the city was jagged. The once tall skyscrapers had chunks worn off, or missing the tops altogether. There were no lights coming from any of the windows. Through a chain link fence, he could see a street. But with no working streetlights, it was cloaked in darkness. If he squinted, he could make out movement, shadowy figures creeping silently around. He saw the entrance to several thin alleyways, pitch black. He had a sinking suspicion that the city was becoming nothing more than a maze. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew from inside, carrying out the overpowering smell of rot. John almost gagged. It smelled like no one had taken the trash out for years, along with something else that he didn't want to think of the source. He was well aware that the disease greatly shortened your lifespan, but before this he had assumed that people went in and disposed of the bodies. Now, however, he wasn't. He was a little unsure. The entirety of the city was surrounded by walls, huge 15-foot walls that buzzed with electricity. The only way he could see inside was through the chain-link gate at the front, covered in padlocks. More guards stood outside of that, dressed in all-black suits and motionless. The 2 guards who had been in the ambulance kept their hands on his shoulders as they steered him forward. One of the guards pointed his weapon at the gate, while the other unlocked the huge padlock. The gate eased forward without a sound, leaving a tiny gap open. John tried fruitlessly to dig his heels into the ground. His breath was coming quicker. This couldn't happen. This couldn't be happening. This clang. The white-suited guards shoved him through the opening and shut the gate. John turned and clung to it. He was inches away from the man closing the padlock again. Tears were springing to his eyes, knuckles white. "Please, let me out. Please, I can't do this. I'm just 13. You can't do this." His pleas escalated to almost a shriek. The man raised his head, finishing the task. "Keep your voice down. You don't want to attract attention here. Now beat it." John ignored him, keeping his knuckles wrapped firmly around the metal, trying to look directly to where he was hoping the man's eyes were. The guard sighed and lifted his gun and pointed it at John's forehead. "You have 10 seconds to get out of my sight, or I'll kill you now and be done with it. This is for the better, you know. You have a chance to live the rest of your life." John was still for 3 seconds. Then his fingers slowly unclasped as he stumbled back. Turning to face the darkened street, he slowly stepped forward, his legs shaking so hard they threatened to give way. "I said move," the guard shouted. John picked up his pace, more scared than he had ever felt in his life. He moved until the darkness completely swallowed him, and collapsed on his knees, his body shaking. The tears that had been welling up in his eyes burst forth as he clamped his hands over his mouth, trying not to make a sound, his entire body racked with sobs as he shuffled backwards until he hit a wall and curled into the smallest ball he could. His glasses dug uncomfortably into his knees, but he didn't move. He half wanted someone or something to find him and get it over with, but he couldn't bring himself to make any noise. Finally, he raised his head, his eyes beginning to adjust. To his left, he could see the gate, a small speck of silver light. Ahead of him, he could see the wall of a crumbling brick building, several small alleyway entrances leading into and through it. The street was cracked concrete, covered in old soda bottles, scraps of who knows what. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, and put them back on. John slowly moved his hands backward and pressed against the wall, pushing himself to a standing position. Suddenly, he sensed movement to his right. When he squinted, he could just see the silhouette of a tall figure with wild hair. They had something short and thick in one hand, like a small baseball bat, and was slowly twirling it around, each twirl bringing it a step closer to John. "Hello?" John stuttered, his voice sounding oddly loud in the silence. The figure said nothing, but stepped closer. John could see eyes now, yellow, glowing eyes. John swallowed, telling himself that it was just a side effect of the disease. Yellow eyes were what everyone had here. He stepped closer to the figure, trying to see better. The next thing that came into view were teeth, a mouth full of pointed, razor-sharp teeth. A sound drifted to his ears. The person was humming. The tune was simple and vaguely familiar. It reminded him of a day he had once with his dad. However, here the tune took an eerie feel. John's earlier decision to stand his ground was sounding more and more stupid by the millisecond. He took a step backwards. The figure did nothing but advanced on him. One step, every twirl. John stepped backwards again. The figure took 2 steps forward. John took another step back, and the figure suddenly broke into a run. John startled and quickened his pace, but the figure was getting closer and closer. Its mouth open in a horrible grin, and its eyes boring into his own. The last thing he could see was 3 horrible scars running across the length of gray, scabby face, when all of a sudden something yanked John sideways by the shoulder. He gasped out of his petrified state. Whatever it was pulled John into a sprint, taking him into an alleyway, then another, changing directions so fast John couldn't keep up. He could hear the figure behind him with loud footsteps and horrible, raspy breaths, but he was pulled farther and further, and the footsteps got quieter and quieter until there was no sound but his own labored breathing. Whoever had grabbed him pulled him to a stop in front of another crumbling building. The grip on his shoulder was released, but another hand clamped over his mouth, one on his back. He was forced through the small hole in the wall, which led inside the building. The inside was even darker than the street. He couldn't see a thing. As John lay pinned against the concrete, he could hear the labored breathing of his savior. He was roughly pulled into a sitting position, and out of the darkness came an agitated whisper. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" And that is chapter 1 and 2 of Haven by Blood. I will put a link in the description for both her channel, her fanfiction account, and the fanfiction itself, as well as my own account. If you missed the first episode, it was my own tender shipping story, and hopefully the next episode for this fanfiction will be up shortly after this comes out. Thanks, guys.